My sister's wedding rehearsal dinner, in front of 60 people, including her future in-laws. My father stood up to give a toast. He looked around the room, smiled that proud smile I'd spent my whole life trying to earn, and said, "We are so grateful for this night. We raised 2 kids. One turned out extraordinary." He paused for effect, and one turned out to be a cautionary tale. Everyone laughed. My mother covered her mouth, but her eyes were smiling. My sister looked briefly uncomfortable, then went back to laughing with her fiancé's mother. I was sitting at the far end of the table with a glass of sparkling water in my hand. I set it down very carefully. I didn't say anything. I didn't flinch. I just made a decision, quiet and clean, the way you make a decision when you've been waiting for it without knowing it. I smiled, pushed back my chair, and walked to the door. My father called after me. "See, can't handle a joke." I kept walking. That was 14 months ago. What happened after that changed everything, but to understand why I walked out and never looked back, you need to understand what I walked away from. I'm the older one. My sister Celeste is 4 years younger, and from the time she was in middle school, the family ran on her schedule. Her recitals, her debate tournaments, her college applications, her internship in Washington. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. It's just true. She was exceptional, and my parents organized their lives around exceptional. I was different, not bad, just different. I liked working with my hands. I liked engines, blueprints, the satisfaction of fixing something that was broken. I was decent in school, but I wasn't Celeste. By the time I graduated high school, it was already a running joke, mild, affectionate at first, that I was the simple one. My dad would ruffle my hair and say it like it was charming. My mother would say I had practical intelligence, which sounds like a compliment until you hear the way she said it. I got accepted to a trade program for HVAC and electrical systems at a technical college 2 states away. Good program. Strong job placement. I was genuinely excited. My father sat me down the night before orientation and told me the family needed me to postpone. My uncle, my dad's older brother, had just had a major stroke. He was 56. He ran a small but steady auto repair shop in our hometown, Millhaven, about 40 minutes north of where we lived. He had no kids, no partner. My dad said someone needed to step in and manage the shop temporarily while my uncle recovered, handle the accounts, keep things from collapsing. He said, just for a few months. He said, "We'll figure out the tuition, we'll make it right." He said, "Celeste can't do it. She's in the middle of her sophomore year at Georgetown." I said yes. Of course I said yes. My uncle taught me how to change oil when I was 9 years old. He used to call me his junior mechanic and mean it as the highest praise in the world. A few months became a year. The shop didn't collapse. I kept it running, brought in 2 new fleet contracts, updated the bookkeeping system, hired a part-time tech. My uncle recovered partially, but couldn't return to full capacity. He was grateful. He said it every time I saw him. My family said nothing. Or rather, they said things like, "Good that you're keeping busy," and "Nice that you found your level." After 2 years, I tried to re-enroll in the technical program. The tuition assistance my father had vaguely promised never materialized. By then, I was paying rent, sending money back to help with my uncle's medical expenses, and keeping myself afloat on what the shop paid me. There was no money left over. No savings. No plan. I eventually got my certifications through night courses and an apprenticeship. It took 4 years instead of 2, and I did it entirely alone. By the time I was 28, I had my HVAC license, my electrical journeyman card, and a client list I'd built. Contact by contact. I wasn't rich, but I was building something real. My family's version of this story was, he couldn't hack college, so he works on air conditioners. I heard my mother tell it that way to a neighbor once. I was standing in the hallway. She didn't know I was there. The year leading up to Celeste's wedding was the worst of it, not because anything new happened. It was the accumulation. The Thanksgiving where my father spent 40 minutes describing Celeste's new position at her consulting firm, and turned to me once to ask if I was still doing the heating and cooling thing. The Christmas where my mother gave Celeste an envelope with money toward her wedding fund and gave me a gift card to a hardware store, $25. I was 31 years old. But the thing that matters most, the thing I need you to understand before the rest of this makes sense. I had started my own company 8 months before the rehearsal dinner, after years of working under other contractors. I'd finally registered an LLC. built a website, took on a handful of commercial accounts. Nothing massive, but growing. I had just signed a contract with a regional property management group to service 14 buildings. It was the biggest thing I'd ever done. I had 2 employees. I was paying health insurance for the first time in my life. I hadn't told my family yet. I was waiting for the right moment. I thought maybe the wedding weekend would be it. I thought maybe I'd finally have something concrete enough, something with numbers attached, that they'd have to see me differently. I got dressed up for that rehearsal dinner. I drove 40 minutes. I sat at the far end of the table and ate my food and waited for a natural opening. Instead, I got the toast. The drive home that night was very quiet. I called my girlfriend Audra from the car. She'd stayed home with a cold and I'd insisted she not come, which, in retrospect, was fortunate. I told her what happened. She went silent for a moment. She said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I think I'm done." She didn't try to talk me out of it. She knew the full history. She had watched me come home from family dinners for 3 years, looking like someone had slowly let the air out of me. She said, "Then you're done. Come home." I drove home and I slept better that night than I had in a long time. The next morning, I texted my sister. I said I wouldn't be at the wedding. I wished her and her fiancé well. Genuinely. I had nothing against her, not really. I said I loved her, but I needed some distance from the family dynamic, and the wedding didn't feel like the right time to navigate that. I kept it short. I didn't explain the toast or list grievances. I just said I needed to step back. She did not respond for 6 days. When she did, she said, "You really are selfish. This is my wedding." My mother called me 8 times in 3 days. I let them go to voicemail. My father texted once, "You embarrassed us by leaving. Fix this." I did not fix it. The wedding happened in late October. I know because I saw the photos on my cousin's social media. Everyone was smiling. My father gave what looked like a long toast. Celeste looked beautiful. I felt sad in a simple, clean way. Not tortured, not angry, just sad. Audra took me camping that weekend. We hiked 8 miles on the second day and sat by a lake in the afternoon, and I didn't think about my family once for nearly 4 hours. That was progress. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to expect, was that something was already unraveling on their end. About 3 months after the wedding, I got a call from my uncle, my dad's brother, the man who'd asked me to step in all those years ago, who I'd worked for, who knew exactly what I'd given up. He said he needed to tell me something. His voice was careful the way voices get when the person has been sitting with information for a while and finally decided to act. He said that 8 months ago, right around the time I'd registered my LLC, my father had gone to 2 of my anchor clients without telling me. He'd called them posing as a family representative and suggested they hold off signing with my company, that I had some personal stability issues, that they should look at other vendors. One of the clients had mentioned the call to my uncle in passing, not knowing the connection. They'd thought it was strange. They'd signed with me anyway. But my uncle, once he heard, had gone back and quietly made some calls. My father had done it twice. 2 separate clients. Only one had mentioned it to anyone. I sat down in the middle of my office floor. I remember that. I just sat down in the middle of my office floor. I remember that. I just sat down. My uncle said, "I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. What he did was wrong." He said he had the name of the contact at the property management group who was willing to confirm the conversation if needed. I said, "Why did he do it?" My uncle was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think he needed you to stay small. I think he's needed that for a long time." I called a lawyer that week. Not to sue, though she told me I'd standing. To understand my options. To have something documented. To know what it would mean if I chose to do something with it. I also called the client directly. The property manager, a practical, no-nonsense woman named after no one in my family's story, who had heard from my father and ignored him and signed with me anyway. She was matter-of-fact about it. She said, "Someone called and said you were unreliable. I'd already checked your references. I figured it was a competitor or a jealous ex. It didn't match anything I'd heard." She paused. "Was it family?" I said yes. She said, "I'm sorry, that's the worst kind." I didn't call my parents immediately. I sat with it for 2 weeks. I talked to Audra every night. I talked to my uncle twice. I talked to a therapist for the first time in my life, which I should have done years earlier, and she helped me understand something important. The goal was not to make my father feel what I had felt. That was not achievable, and not actually what I wanted. The goal was to stop pretending this was a family dynamic I could eventually fix with enough patience and enough success. I sent my father a letter. Not an email, a letter, printed, mailed. I told him I knew what he'd done. I named the clients, named the dates as best I could reconstruct them. I told him I had spoken to a lawyer. I told him I was not pursuing legal action at this time, but that I was done with silence. I said that for my entire adult life, I had tried to be enough for a family that had decided before I started that I wasn't, and I was not doing it anymore. I said, you called my clients to sabotage my business. I want you to think about what kind of father does that. I didn't sign it with love. I signed it with my name. My mother called me the day after the letter would have arrived. She was crying. She said my father was devastated. She said I was destroying the family. She said, you know how he is. He worries about you. I said, sabotaging my clients is not how you worry about someone. She said, you've always been so sensitive. I said, Mom, I need to go. And I hung up. My sister called 2 days later. I didn't expect that. Her voice was flat, not warm, but she was trying. She said she talked to my uncle. She said she didn't know what to say except that what our father had done wasn't right. That was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I ever got from my immediate family. I told her I appreciated her saying it. I meant it. Here's what happened to my company in the 14 months after I walked out of that rehearsal dinner. The property management contract grew from 14 buildings to 22. I hired a third employee, a woman just finishing her apprenticeship who reminded me of myself at 22 sharp, underestimated, working twice as hard as anyone noticed. I got a secondary contract with a small hotel group. I started a maintenance subscription model for residential clients that generated steady monthly revenue for the first time. I'm not wealthy. I want to be honest about that. I have a business that is growing in a direction I can see. I have an apartment I chose, furniture I picked out, a weekend life that belongs to me. I have Audra, who has been beside me through every hard thing I just described, without once making me feel like a burden for having lived through it. My father sent me one text. 3 months after the letter, it said, your mother misses you. Think about what you're doing to her. I did not respond. My uncle and I have dinner once a month. He's doing better. His left side is still slower than it used to be, but he got back behind the counter last spring, part-time, mostly just because he missed his regulars. He told me recently that I saved the shop and that he never forgot it. He said my father had always envied that. The way the shop workers talked about me, the way the fleet clients asked for me by name. He said he couldn't stand that you were respected somewhere, even somewhere small. I thought about that a lot. The idea that someone who was supposed to want the best for you could be quietly working against you because your success, in any form, felt like a reproach to him. I don't fully understand it. I don't think I'm supposed to. What I understand is this. I built something. I built it without their help, without their belief in me, and in at least 2 documented cases against their active interference. I built it early in the morning and late at night and on weekends when I should have been resting. I built it the way I learned to do everything, without being shown how, without someone in my corner, by figuring it out as I went. I am 32 years old. I have never once been called extraordinary by my family. I have stopped waiting for that. Last month, my uncle forwarded me an email. He said I didn't have to read it, but he thought I should have it. It was from my father to my uncle, sent about 2 weeks after he received my letter. It was long. I'm not going to share most of it, but there was one line near the end that I keep coming back to, not because it was an apology. It wasn't. But because it was the most honest thing I have ever seen him write. He said, I didn't think he had it in him. I was wrong. 6 words. After 32 years. Not an apology, not a reconciliation. Just a man admitting to his brother, privately, in an email he didn't know his son would ever see, that he had underestimated me, that he had been wrong. I folded the email and put it in the drawer of my desk, not as a trophy, not to return to when I need validation. I put it there because it is the truth, documented in his own handwriting, that I was worth more than he let himself believe. I already knew that. I've known her for years. But it was something, to finally see it written down. I've thought a lot about what it actually costs to stay in a room where you are not seen, Not the dramatic cost, not the blow-ups or the confrontations. The quiet cost. The way you calibrate yourself smaller before you walk through the door. The way you rehearse explanations for your choices to people who've already decided those choices don't count. I did that for years. I got very good at it, and I think that's the part I most needed to stop. What happened to me? What my father did, calling my clients, quietly trying to pull the ground out from under something I built, didn't come from nowhere. It came from a pattern that had been running my entire life. When someone around you succeeds at something they weren't supposed to be capable of, it forces a reckoning. Either they update what they believe about you, or they find a way to make sure you don't succeed. My father chose the second option. I don't think he planned it coldly. I think it was reflex. The reflex of a man who had organized his understanding of his family around one child being the capable one, and who couldn't absorb evidence that he'd been wrong. That's what I mean when I say actions have weight that follows them. Not in any mystical sense. Just the plain mechanical truth that what you choose to do shapes the world you end up living in. My father's choice to undermine me didn't stop my business. It just meant that when I finally learned what he'd done, there was nothing left between us worth protecting. He spent years making me smaller in his mind, and then spent one afternoon trying to make me smaller in fact. And the consequence of that wasn't punishment from outside. It was just the natural end of something that had been dying for a long time. The thing about integrity, about doing the work even when nobody's watching, doing it honestly, doing it well, is that it accumulates. Quietly, without fanfare, without anyone handing you credit. I spent years building skills my family dismissed. I spent years serving clients who valued what I could actually do, not what a diploma said I could do. And when my father called those clients to cast doubt on me, they already had 3 years of evidence in the other direction. He was asking them to disbelieve what they had experienced. They didn't. That's what no one tells you about building something with your hands, with your own time, through your own effort. It becomes evidence. It becomes a record. And a record is harder to argue with than an opinion. I am not the most articulate person. I'm better with a circuit diagram than a speech. But I know this, the moment I stopped trying to earn my family's revised opinion of me was the moment I had enough space to actually become someone. Not the someone they wanted. The someone I was already capable of being all along, while they were looking somewhere else. Audra asked me once, after everything came out, whether I was angry. I thought about it honestly. I said, less than I expected, because anger assumes the other person had the power to give you something they withheld. And I don't think my father ever had what I was looking for. He couldn't give me belief in myself. That was never his to give. I had to build that the same way I built everything else, one job at a time in the early morning without anyone cheering me on, and it turned out that was enough.